Welcome to the global phenomenon, Surviving the Survivor, where we bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning journalist, Joel Waldman.
There's not a Dateline episode that I have not seen. I actually record Dateline episodes on OWN, and when they are reruns, I get upset. And half the time, I can't remember if I've seen them or not. This brings me to a bigger question, a bigger issue, which is what is wrong with me? Because I realize what it is. When I watched Murders, I actually feel better about myself, that my life is not so bad. But there's a man on today on the podcast that knows more about this than anyone. He is the great, inimitable Chris Hansen from Dateline's To Catch a Predator. How are you, Chris?
I'm good. How are you guys today? Thanks for having me on.
We are wonderful. And shout out to Detroit, Michigan, which is where you're from, and my buddy Matt Brode from Ann Arbor, the A2. Let's tell the audience a little bit about Chris, and then we're going to hop right into it. So for those who have been living under a rock and don't know who Chris Hansen is, he's a broadcast journalist and YouTube personality, best known for his work, as I mentioned, on Dateline NBC and its recurring episodes of To Catch a Predator, which was a giant hit, which revolved around catching potential internet sex predators using a sting operation. Capitalizing on Chris's success and his predator investigations, Dateline NBC created not one, not two, but 3 Tuesday night spinoffs of its original concept, where he hosted To Catch a Con Man and To Catch an ID Thief. The con man part, we were just talking about my website, our website for the podcast. We might need to get Chris on that. Guy scammed me. Hansen also wrote a book, To Catch a Predator, Protecting Your Kids from Online Enemies Already in Your Home. And he has started a YouTube channel under the name Have a Seat with Chris Hansen, which you need to check out on YouTube. Karm, Chris is a phenomenal example of personal branding. Shout out to Mark Schaefer, and someone that we can model ourselves after, even though we haven't quite figured out who we are and what we are yet, Karm. But
well, we have 42 episodes. We should. It's like we do have 42 episodes.
That's awesome.
It's time to start to figure out what we are doing.
Now,
right?
Karm, before we get into this, and we're going to get into it right this second, who was just named People Magazine's Sexiest Man Alive? And there's a reason I bring this up.
Well, it wasn't Musk. No, he was the Man of the Year, the sexiest man.
Yes,
George Clooney or who?
It was Paul Rudd, who my wife loves.
I don't think. Oh yeah, I remember, and I completely wanted to forget that because I don't think he's the worst.
He's a rom-com actor. But if I had my choice, it's someone that Chris Hansen knows well, who I hope he likes, because you never know. TV news personalities, sometimes they work together, but they hate each other. But if I had my choice, Chris Hansen would be second, but number one would be Keith Morrison of Dateline. Karm, do you know who he is?
You know what? I sort of know, but I am not even a Dateline person. I'm like one of these gigantic ignoramuses.
Which is weird because more women watch these shows way more than men. But Chris, is Keith a good guy?
Keith is a wonderful guy. All the guys and gals at Dateline are great. Keith and Dennis and Josh, all very good friends of mine. And, I worked with them for 20 plus years. And before I branched out to do all these other projects I've got going on now. But yeah, Keith is great. What I always say about Dateline is that in a business where there are a lot of very smart people, we sort of had the market cornered, from management on down, with smart people who are also very nice, who are good storytellers. And because we're always traveling and in different parts of the country, we very rarely got together, maybe only 2 or 3 times a year, but it was always a great pleasure to be together. And when I see Josh or Keith or anybody now, it's great. It's like time never passed. So I can't believe we've all been doing it for so many years.
I'm very happy to hear that.
Because, solid man.
Yeah, because outside of Dateline, most people in the TV news business like to throw daggers in each other's backs.
Well, it's a little cutthroat, and I've seen that too in various places in my career. Now, and this, I mean, I'm very fortunate to have had 20 plus years at NBC to branch out and do all the things I'm doing now, which, really fortunate.
Maybe we should also talk about what's happening now.
I
tried to Google you and get educated. for full disclosure to you, so that you know how big an ignoramus I am in the area of crime stories, I have an 88-year-old husband, and him and I, we watch romances. We don't watch.
You like that, like the Hallmark Channel, do you?
Not that bad. That's too artificial sweetener.
She likes Paul Rudd movies. She just doesn't know who he is.
No, I know who he is. He's in this. What is the name of the 40-year-old virgin type of?
Yeah.
What was the name of the guy?
No, that's not. That I don't think that was Paul. That's
but
Steve Carell. But Karm,
no.
Karm, we have precious minutes with a well-known crime reporter. So Chris, right off the bat, was Jeffrey Epstein murdered in prison?
I don't have anything to suggest that he was actually murdered. The autopsy was ruled a suicide, as you know. The injuries are consistent with a suicide, albeit the extreme side of that manner of death. But it happens, and he had tried it once before, and apparently was able to try it again. I think the larger question, when it comes to conspiracy theories in Epstein's death, is did somebody walk away? Did somebody take money to walk away, to not pay attention, to make sure there wasn't another inmate watching him, or somebody being supervised? And why was the camera either not being monitored or not working? Now we know that the Metropolitan Correctional Center there, the federal lockup in Manhattan, is a mess. Poorly staffed, poorly trained, poorly run overall. So it's consistent with some of the other things that have been going on there that just didn't happen with such a high profile inmate. So I have to say, based upon what I know right now, it was suicide.
Interesting. I mean, it's just insane that video, it didn't disappear. It was never recorded, right? Right.
Exactly. That's my understanding.
Which is just absolutely crazy. And I think we are on like day 3 right now, not to date our podcast, but I will, of the, I never know how to pronounce her name. Is it Ghislaine? Ghislaine. Yeah.
Ghislaine Maxwell. Yeah.
Well, what's your prediction? But you will be outed.
Well, I think I think the jury will be finished deliberating before the end of business tomorrow, with the holiday coming. I think the fact that they did not come to a verdict in the first full day of deliberations, bodes somewhat well for the defense, although the prosecution's evidence here was pretty overwhelming. If the jury gets hung up on one thing, it's going to be this previous plea agreement that Epstein's lawyers were able to work out down in Florida, where blanket immunity was granted, or pretty much blanket immunity was granted, not just Epstein, but to anybody in his orbit. And you could argue that, this should extend to Ghislaine Maxwell, no matter how bad her grooming was, her pimping, if you will, her procurement for Jeffrey Epstein, which clearly happened. These witnesses are believable. I've talked to some of them who have not gone public yet. I've talked to some of their lawyers. I'm familiar with this case. And, this grooming was clearly an intent to get these women beholden to Epstein and to perform sex acts for money. And some of them were underage. And he was able to manipulate the system and to pull in political favors because of the money that changed hands and the money he made for people to get this plea bargain back in, I guess it was 2008, and walk with just, a year of daytime in the county jail.
Karm, I know you have a question because you raised your hand,
yes.
But you're a paranoid individual, Karm.
Yes,
but yet you think it was a suicide too, right?
I think it was a suicide, and I want to know if the jury is unanimous and finds her guilty, will she name names?
Well, that's a good question. So she'll be guilty. She'll have to serve the sentence the judge imposes, and it's federal time. So there is no real good time. You get 51 days a year if you behave off of your sentence. So you do all the sentence besides the 51 days. Now, you can get a presidential pardon or some sort of deal like that, which I don't see in the works. Or you could revisit the case with the Justice Department You could provide information in an ongoing investigation, and there could be a reduction of sentence along those lines. Now, clearly, she knows a lot, and she has not told authorities everything she knows. So at some point, if there's a conviction, does she have a change of heart and decide to cooperate? If you're looking at 75 years in federal prison, maybe you do. Maybe you try to say, okay, I'll do 20, I'll go in the witness protection program, or I'll do 10 and go in the witness protection program, and I'll give you these big figures who are equally as culpable in this scheme.
I'm happy to name names. Former President Trump, Bill Clinton, Bill Gates, Alan Dershowitz, was it one of the princes? I mean, a lot of these names.
Joel, if you continue like this, you may be run over by accident.
Luckily, we don't have as big an audience as Chris Hansen. But yeah, it's an amazing case. I don't know. I would like to think it was a suicide. Which is not something you would normally say. But I have my doubts for sure. And I've been listening to my direct competitor, Joe Rogan, who is a bit of a conspiracy theorist. And he definitely believes it was a cover-up. But when you're dealing with names this powerful, I don't know, you've got to kind of wonder what happened.
You can wonder, yeah, but it's still, I, as a journalist, and this, I have to go with what the facts are in front of me that I have, and everything that I have seen, and everyone I've talked to who I trust, who's in a position to know, says suicide.
Karm?
You mentioned something, I think in a podcast, or I don't know where I read it on Google, that you were going to be part of this and work on this, but then you were kind of sidetracked. I forget for what reason, and then you didn't.
Yeah, I was looking into the Epstein case in about 2015, 2016, and we had a lot of information, and a lot of the investigators who were working on the civil side of this thing. And I thought we could fashion some sort of a sting, a la Catch a Predator. Hansen versus Predator, something like that. And it turned out that it was just so difficult to even penetrate, the levels of security and his the physical setup of his New York home and the West Palm Beach home, that it was difficult to do. And to be honest with you, I just got busy with other projects, and the way it went, it was the Miami Herald reporter, Julie K. Brown, who continually chipped away at this, and made it a daily story, and convinced some of these survivors and victims to come forward. And the U.S. attorney at the time said as much when they arrested Epstein, that without the Miami Herald's reporting, and she's now written a book, which is very good. If you haven't read it, you should pick it up.
I have not read it.
What's the name?
That without the Miami Herald's reporting, there probably wouldn't have been the 2019 indictment of Jeffrey Epstein. So, we talk about how important local news is, not just network news, but local news, and the people who are in the trenches. And I came up through local news as a reporter in Lansing and Tampa and Detroit before I went to New York. And it's critical work, and it's not often recognized, and it's not often compensated handsomely. And it should be, because, this is the difference that a local reporter at the Miami Herald can make. Plain and simple.
Thank you, Julie K. Brown. So let's take a half step back here, Chris.
Sure.
Why are people so obsessed with true crime and the types of stories that you work on? What is it? What's the hook?
Well, I think it's part what you mentioned earlier. You see something that makes your life look pretty good because you're not the victim of a wives with knives scenario. Yeah. But I also think that, look, true crime novels and movies and gangster films and all that have been popular for generations. So what we've done in this genre is just take it to the next level. And what I've always tried to do, and what I do in my current projects, is to take viewers on a journey of discovery. So whether it's the Onision, a real life case, or Unseemly, the Peter Nygaard investigation that you can get on Discovery Plus, we take people behind the scenes. It's what we do with the Predator investigations. I just shot a new one 2 nights ago. an episode where several guys showed up. But we take people inside the commission of a crime so that they see things they wouldn't normally see. They hear things they wouldn't normally hear. And we give them access to something they wouldn't normally have access to. And we take them
meet the criminals. So
kind of ratchet.
Well, we try to get in their mind. And my theory is if you can take the viewer on a journey of discovery like this, and they can do all of that, and we can get inside a predator or a criminal's mind and hear the voice of a victim, you can better prevent other people from becoming victims. You mentioned, financial scams and that sort of thing. I mean, they are absolutely running rampant right now during the holiday season. And I'm getting emails every day from some of my producers whose elderly parents are getting targeted, and
they're not
offensive.
Paranoid enough.
Yeah. Carmela has plenty of paranoia. The Holocaust helped out in some ways.
Yeah, I imagine it would.
No, but believe me, I get scammed too, believe me.
I don't think so. Not that much.
By my children, I get scammed.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true.
Don't we all?
Yeah. So Chris, to the point we were just addressing, women, the demographic far outweighs the number of men watching these shows. What is it that intrigues women so much about murderers and predators and people of this nature?
I think I know the answer.
Well, Karm, what's your answer? You are a woman.
Karm, what's your answer? I'd like to hear your answer.
Yeah, as a woman.
Well, they cannot kill their husbands.
So I don't know if that's the answer I wanted, being a married fellow. But
vicariously.
We're both married. Yeah.
We are both married.
Well, all three of us are married.
All three of us.
Exactly.
He has three beautiful children.
Only one of us, I believe, is married to a Latina woman, which is probably the most dangerous, and that would be me. But no, Karm, you think that's what it is? You think they get a little thrill watching men be murdered?
Yeah, especially if the murderer is the woman, because the very few that I watched through the years, and I confess I am not right for this interview, but I never shut up, even if I don't know what I'm talking about. So I will chime in, but I usually don't watch. I watch very few, and I have to. Can I tell you something? Is he frozen?
Sure.
Oh,
No, we're good.
No, the interest. Listen to something funny that maybe will help you in your field. I now developed a bad habit of putting on a movie, any movie, and usually I hit it past the middle. And then I challenge myself to create the beginning of the movie. And it's a very interesting new way of approaching stories, like you.
So you pick it up halfway through.
And then I figure out what happened before. And it's easier because I usually, when I watch murder stories, I am pretty good at telling who done it,
Chris, what's your take? Why are women more intrigued?
It's a great question, and I don't know that I have the exact answer to it. I mean, I think there's a curiosity about it in general. And my sort of reporting has a lot of male, fans too, and it is multi-generational because of the, sort of the investigative nature and the iconic nature of the whole predator investigation. But I just think there's a genuine curiosity and kind of a need to know, why does this stuff happen? And I think, this sort of crime content satisfies that curiosity. And I think it might be a little bit of what your mom said about, maybe thinking about committing the perfect crime. Maybe that
they're trying to get the recipe.
I think it's escapism with a bit of a prurient interest. And there's no danger there. You get to walk on the wild side and see what happens behind the scenes. It's the best mystery ever because it's real life. It's drama, but it's based on real events. And why the hell does somebody do this to another human being? And I think there's a large audience who's curious to try and sort that out, just like people want to be law enforcement officers or homicide investigators,
abhorrent
behavior is like very intriguing. But would you spend just a minute telling our audience how the women don't do this?
Well, that's not always true.
Almost always. And now I'm speaking up for the women.
Yeah. In terms of committing the crime?
They will not like get in touch with a 14-year-old on the
yes.
web.
Well, that's you raise a very good point. In all our investigations, all the predator investigations, which now have spanned some 17 years, and again, as I mentioned, we just did one 2 nights ago. That'll be on television soon. We have never seen a female predator go online. It's happened, and I write about it a little bit in the book, but we've never seen one show up in one of our investigations. And the therapist, the psychiatrist, tell us that it's because typically in the female predator scenario, you're more likely to see the teacher student. The female predator doesn't like the anonymity that often excites the male predator. And again, I'm not a therapist or a psychiatrist. I just play one occasionally on TV, but that seems to be the case. And it's consistent with what we found.
Which, by the way,
everybody has seen the shocking teacher stories, but we've never seen a woman show up in one of our investigations.
Carmela is a licensed therapist, and her husband, my father, is a retired psychiatrist. So
that's why he's crazy.
It explains a lot, doesn't it?
Too much.
Listen, I wouldn't brag about this one if I were you.
You know what's
Joel.
interesting? We're talking about female predators, and there's a story in the news right now. One of my, I don't like to call him a close friend, but an acquaintance, Chris Cuomo, is having a rough patch. His producer, former producer, John Griffin, was just arrested. He was reaching out to mothers. Are you aware of this, Carmela? And he was asking,
he was grooming their children.
The daughters.
Yes,
that made me nauseated.
He wanted to train minor daughters, and some of these women, at least one, bid on that, right, Chris?
Yeah, one, the parent of, I believe, a 9-year-old girl, the mother, traveled to Boston. He picked them up, took them to his home in Vermont, where he had a second home, and engaged in illicit, illegal sexual behavior with a minor, and paid the mother money to do this. And apparently, according to the FBI affidavit and the criminal charges, he had been trying to do this before. And I'm not sure how he was caught, but the authorities got wind of this and started investigating and gathered evidence that he was online going into these various forums, encouraging mothers of children to bring their daughters to his home in Vermont, his vacation ski home, and teach them subservience and sex with a grown man, which is horrifying. And, there's no suggestion that Chris Cuomo had any knowledge of this whatsoever. It just, it's a bad optic, obviously, based upon what he went through and what his brother, the governor, went through. And then to have this indictment come out. But there's no, I don't think it was timed because it was, targeting Chris. I just think this was a bad guy who got caught and, they arrested him.
Chris, when you started these Predator series, for those of us old enough to remember, there were chat rooms that were really
AOL and Yahoo.
Yeah, AOL and Yahoo. You'd type in a box and that was it. But how has the advancement of technology advanced the predatorial, the potential
activity
for correct? That's the word I was looking for.
It's exploded. It's exponential. Imagine, as you mentioned, when we first started doing these investigations, we merely had decoys and chat rooms at AOL and Yahoo. One time there was a massive fire on the West Coast and the Yahoo servers went out and we were out of the water. We couldn't communicate. Our decoys couldn't communicate and we couldn't direct the predator to the house. We had to stop the investigation and come back when the servers went back up. Today, with the explosion, as I mentioned, of these social media platforms upon which children can be approached by adults. You've got TikTok and Skip the Games and Kick, and it goes on and on and on. I can't even keep up with it. And then you consider the pandemic when more kids are online than ever before. That's why I started my podcast, Predators I've Caught, where we go back and look at these cases of the hundreds of men I've caught and dig into their backgrounds and get into more detail as to what happened. Was because I thought, and my producers thought, that this would be a benefit to parents to understand how these guys work, because the opportunity is greater than ever, and this is a crime when you think about it, that it's not like a drug addiction. It's very hard to have demand reduction. So your best defense is deterrence, of course, but your main line of defense here is to have this discussion with your children. It's awareness and the creation of a dialogue that perhaps didn't exist before. And that's what I think we were able to do with this series and what we continue to do with the series of the podcast. And it brings light to it. And you got to start talking to your kids at an early age, at an age appropriate conversation level, and say, look, you're going to be online. There are adults also online who will try to trick you. And that's where it starts. Kids, as a therapist, kids don't like to be tricked. And you start there. But the grooming process that goes on. I mean, I had just 2 nights ago, we had a Dow Chemical computer engineer, 44 years old, walk into the sting looking for a teen girl. On and on and on and on. We were communicating with somebody who said they were a teacher. And we've had teachers come into these stings. We've had doctors come into these stings. People from all walks of life.
Don't forget,
so this isn't going anywhere. Yeah, that's exactly right. And he's been in trouble ever since then.
Non-stop.
Karm, you brought it up. I was going to avoid it because I thought if I brought it up, you'd be like, why are you bringing up the one Jewish guy? But the one...
it's not the one
It's not the one Jewish guy, but it was the first... It was the first...
it was the first clergyman.
Clergy, that's why I think I'm getting Alzheimer's. I'm having trouble
You're
retrieving...
tired.
It's called Newsheimer's.
The poor man works too hard.
Yeah, I'm working too hard right now.
I can relate to that.
Yeah, but so Rabbi David Kay, since we are surviving the survivor, tell us a little bit about him, Chris. And
David Kay surfaced in our second investigation, which we conducted in Herndon, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. And he was the first guy to surface in the investigation at like noon on a Wednesday. And he comes in to meet a 13-year-old boy with a bounce in his step, excited. I mean, like no fear in the world of getting caught. And then the decoy goes upstairs, says, there's a dialogue. And, he was supposed to have a date with a gal. He's a divorced guy and had children, grown children. And he said, well, maybe we'll see. He was going to come back and visit the boy that night after his date with a woman. And I walk out and he doesn't know. Now, remember, this is only the second time we've done this. So he's not hip to the fact that this is To Catch a Predator and this is me. He more or less thinks that I'm either the mad dad who walked in the other door or I'm the police. And we play this cat and mouse game of who are you? Now I already know he's a rabbi. I already know his name. I know his age. I think at the time where he worked, he wasn't a pulpit rabbi. He worked for an organization that educated Jewish kids in Israeli government affairs in Washington. And so this dialogue continues and he gets snotty with me. He demands to know who I am. And I slide across a picture that he sent to the decoy, who he thought was a 13-year-old boy, of him performing sex on another man. I said, is this appropriate? And you've seen the video. And he lunges and this whole thing happens. And so he leaves. And because we did not, in that particular investigation, collaborate with law enforcement, he's just gone. But the FBI saw it. And the Fairfax, Virginia Police Department saw it. And they went after a lot of these guys. And it wasn't until the next investigation that we collaborated with law enforcement, which is what we do now. But they charged David Kay, and he went to federal court trial. He had a bench trial, so no jury. The defense lawyer figuring they could convince the judge that this was some sort of entrapment or a TV sting, that he really wasn't going to do anything. And the judge saw right through it and saw that the rabbi had perjured himself on the stand and found him guilty and then sentenced him. He went above and beyond the guidelines, which a judge has to present evidence to do so because the federal guidelines are very strict, and sentences him to 6.5 years in prison. He gets out and very quickly violates his probation. So then he's back in. He's been in and out 4 or 5 times. And the last time, and we talk about this in the podcast, in his episode, he is actually seeing his therapist, his court-ordered therapist. And as part of his probation, he's not supposed to have a device that can access porn sites and deviant sites on the internet. While he's at the therapist, the probation officer comes in for a visit. And while they're talking, his illegal phone, his illicit phone goes off. It rings in the therapist's office. So he's busted again.
Not a nice Jewish boy. This is not a nice Jewish boy. The kicker to this, I read, was he tried to go back to being a rabbi eventually.
Right.
He was shunned by the congregation or wherever he worked and became a light bulb salesman.
Probably very successful.
Continuing to enlighten people.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that he wasn't a rabbi. So, Chris, is there, of all these people, is there sort of a profile or a common denominator that strings them all together? They're obviously different shapes, sizes, colors, all of that,
Sure.
ages, but what is the common thread?
I think these guys, and again, I'm not a therapist, but based upon my experience and the therapists we've talked to over the years, and we've talked to some pretty sharp ones who work for the U.S. Marshals, for instance, who study these guys. That's their whole practice, is to study sex offenders and pedophiles. I think they break up into three categories. You got the younger group of guys who are opportunists, who are socially inept, who might be 18, 19, 20 years old or in their early 20s. They figure, well, if we hook up with a girl who's 13 or 14 and this works out, she's not that much younger than me. It's a Romeo-Juliet situation. At some point, if this continues, she'll be of age. Those guys largely can be treated, not all, but some can be treated, put on probation, registration, monitoring, and never offend again. And we've seen some of these cases where they don't go on to offend again. Then you've got the hardcore heavy hitter guys who, no matter what generation, what age, what set of circumstances, with or without the internet, they'd be offending. They'd be looking for kids at the mall, the bad Little League coach, the Cub Scout master, whatever. And then there's this group in the middle who probably wouldn't offend without the internet, who have a predilection for sexual attraction to a boy or a girl underage. And they get online, they say things they wouldn't normally say face to face, but it's acceptable online because it's dehumanized in a way. They get hooked up in the addictive nature, the access 24/7, and then just the anonymity of it. And they cross that line between fantasy and reality, and they're knocking on our door. And that's a lot of what we see, honestly.
Karm, you raised your hand again.
Well, forget it. But there's a senior moment. Every single session I have.
That's not Alzheimer's. That's the real Alzheimer's.
That's the real thing. It's the real McCoy. I had such a good question.
Too,
So,
I told Joel, ask me immediately before it flies out of my mind.
Why don't you start to write your questions down? Just give yourself a hint. How's that? So, Chris, To Catch a Predator or not, of all the cases in your storied career that you've covered, which is the most disturbing?
I think it was when it's a 100-way tie for first, clearly, but it's that's my world. But I think the one that really impacted me personally on a number of different levels, just as a human being, not even as a journalist, was when we went over to Cambodia and we partnered with an NGO called the International Justice Mission. And we had our producers and some of the IJM people infiltrate a brothel outside of Phnom Penh, where they were selling girls who were 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old for sex, not just to Cambodians, but to Americans, to Western Europeans. And we infiltrated this brothel, and they ultimately did a raid, and 37 of these young girls were rescued. Many of them stayed out of the life and went to a bridge school where they had a new life. So we did that story, and it was an incredible undercover video investigation, won a couple Emmys and all that. But it got people's attention, and it changed laws for sex tourism and sex trafficking in the United States, in Canada, around the globe, essentially. And we went back 4 years later and visited some of these girls in their new life. And it was just so compelling and heartwarming and touching to me. I remember at the end of the interview, and the second time we went over there, and the girls, and again, they speak Khmer, and obviously my Khmer is less than fluent.
Khmer Rouge.
Khmer Rouge, exactly. And so we're having this conversation as best as we can, the translator's there. And I said, well, they asked, when are you going back? I said, well, I'm going back tomorrow night, flying back to United States. And he said, can we go to the airport with you? And I said, yeah, if it's okay with the school, it's fine by me. It'd be nice to have a little group see me off. And so the translator or the school official says, well, I think what they really want is to go to the airport because that's the only Dairy Queen in Phnom Penh. I said, you know what? I think, I can pop for 6 banana splits. That's fine. But whatever it is, I'm in. Send them over. So we get to the airport, and obviously it's a big schlep to travel through, from Phnom Penh to Hong Kong to Paris and then back as whatever the route was. And so we having our banana splits. And again, we're having this kind of largely difficult conversation, but they're cute, sweet. I mean, just faces of angels. And we finish up and we all say goodbye and the cultural thing that goes on forever. And there's this 2-story glass wall that separates where the Dairy Queen is outside security and the ticket counter. And they wait there and I go in and I look back and the cameraman's rolling throughout. They're capturing this whole thing and they've got their hands pressed upon the glass. And I walk over and I press my hands back and I'm like crying at this point. Wow. Just every emotion is being pulled out of me at the moment. And the cameraman, this is a guy who's, been in every war place in the world and he's crying and the producer's crying, but it was just so impactful. And it was one of those things where, okay, it's great to win Emmys. It's wonderful to tell the story. It's great to shine a light on evil, and that's our job. But you know what? We changed some lives, right? And these 6 girls are going to be better off because of what we did. And I talked about Julie K. Brown's book earlier and larger lessons in journalism. That kind of work isn't going on right now in journalism. And I'm bound and determined to bring some of that back. I know that the murder stories are important and that's what pays the bills. I know To Catch a Predator or Hansen versus Predator or Takedown, which is what we call the new show, that pays the bills. And it's important. And people want to watch it both online and on TV. But there isn't a great drive to do this anymore. Dateline used to let me do it because it was like, okay, you do all the other stuff. And once a year, you get to do something that's really out there and expensive and dangerous. And it is difficult. It's difficult journalism. And some of the papers are still doing it, but you don't see it a lot on television.
Like the investigative in general.
It's very important stuff.
Investigative is very important.
Yes, it is important. It changes, the New York Times has done a great job on some of the stuff recently having to do with the some of the military stuff. And there's a lot of it at all sides of journalism that's really good and really important. But, it's expensive, and what day is a network executive going to say, okay, here's $600,000 for Chris Hansen to go do this and maybe it works out and maybe it doesn't. It's a hard decision to make. I get it. And it's risky. Well, and like I always tell my crew, it was easy. Everybody could do it, but it's not. And so we're the guys who have to do it. So let's do it.
Journalism is in great hands now with Sean Hannity and Jesse Waters. What were you going to say, Karm?
No, I was going to you changed my life again for the better. Because you told me to write it down when I think about it, so I wrote it down.
Jot a note down, Karm, and I can see the note already, and I think you're going to pitch Chris a new show to catch a Jewish predator.
No. The Jewish is
to catch
over.
An oy
you see, a rabbi has the title of Jewish.
Well, Karm, you're leading us into something here, so I want to go. Chris's time is valuable. Let's go over a few high-profile people, and you go first. No. Karm, women first.
No, I was thinking just now Woody Allen came out with a new film I think he made it in Europe, in Spain and Portugal. I don't know exactly where. And then one of the actors there was an article in the paper how he doesn't believe that Woody Allen molested an 8-year-old. I think her name was Dylan or something. Now, as an expert on this, how do you read him?
That's a great question. I don't know that I consider myself an expert on it, but I've certainly got some experience in talking to people who have done this. I watched some of the documentary on the whole Woody Allen thing, and I don't think that he would have escaped prosecution today. I have a lot of questions about the way that the DA handled it in Connecticut. I'm not saying there was anything untoward, and I'm not saying that he was given a break because of his celebrity. And today that would work against you for being a celebrity in that sort of situation. I think there were some gray areas. I think that there's enough there that in 2021, the investigation would have been different. I think he was given the benefit of the doubt in some of these cases because of his celebrity, because of his ability to face some of the accusations head on. I guess we'll never really know because we weren't in the room when he was there with the child. We know what the allegations were between his ex-wife, the mother of the child. And it just, I'm not going to say that the investigation was fumbled in any way, but I think the allegations would have been, I don't know, maybe more closely scrutinized by the public. Go ahead.
I have a question. Like, take the rabbi, okay? He never stopped after every time he was caught and jailed. When he came out, he went back to the activity.
Correct.
As a therapist, I am thinking, and believe me, I love the work of Woody Allen, but I don't love the man.
Yeah.
So I separate the two. But still, I am wondering if somebody who molested one child once, wouldn't this person have a pattern of molesting children? Isn't that kind of unusual to once molest one child and then forget about it?
But if you look at it and that's true, and you're right, and I defer to you because you are the therapist here, and I'm not.
Just a phony therapist.
No, don't sell yourself short.
No,
I'm
joking.
Not. Yeah, I know you are. I know you, but I have deep respect for you and your profession. But I think a lot of things that were acceptable when this was all going down in the early 90s, and I wasn't on the scene. I was still a local reporter in Detroit, so I didn't cover it. So when you cover a story, you pick up on the nuance of it. You pick up on, whether the celebrity is hurting that person or helping that person, whether, because he's an artist and so many people love his work, did people look the other way because Sonny Previn was his stepdaughter and young, but not illegally young? It was creepy when you look back. I would say, was it illegal? No. So you can't bust him for being creepy. But does that creepiness indicate a pattern of behavior that gives credence to the allegations that were made earlier? I don't know.
I mean,
Karm, I have
the
2
fact
points.
that he married his stepdaughter is kind of
that's
creepy.
my point.
Yeah,
that's
creepy.
That's
100% creepy.
2 things. Woody Allen, 173% has major issues. I'll go on the record saying that. Number 2, just stick to Mel Brooks. He's never done anything wrong. Stick to Mel. He's funny. He's still kicking. So, Chris, real quickly, because again, time is precious. In the same vein as Woody Allen, Michael Jackson, may he rest in peace. He was acquitted by a jury of his peers. I have no doubt he did what he was accused of. Your thoughts?
Well, again, it's another story that I didn't really cover except for kind of an overarching piece in which I interviewed Maureen Orth, the very fine reporter who put together a piece for Vanity Fair. So I don't want to wade too far into it because I just didn't personally cover it. I have to believe, based upon the totality of evidence, it just inappropriate on every level. His behavior and having the children over, and where were the parents on this stuff?
Yeah.
It's
talk about being enamored.
Here's a guy who got away with a lot of stuff because of his fame.
Correct.
There's no question, right? And even if you buy into the Neverland and never having a childhood, and I just want to help the kids. I mean, you can't let kids be in that environment. It's wrong. It's going to be highly sexualized, inappropriate, and lead to what is essentially the rape of a child. I mean, what do the math on it? Do you think I'm wrong here?
100% not. 100%.
Okay.
I mean,
So
the parents turned a blind eye. I mean, and that's where you get enamored with celebrity, where people don't realize that these are, at the end of the day, they're just twisted humans.
Right.
But so also you're working, and I did not know about this story at all. I just caught it 2020 because I have no life, and that's what I do now on weekends because I have 3 kids and a wife and 2 dogs. And one point I was out having fun, and anyway, I digress.
He has little kids. He got married a little later. He's a mama's boy, basically.
I'm a late bloomer,
Yeah.
Chris.
Yeah, that's all right. The best is yet to come.
Yes. So Peter Nygaard. Chris, why don't you tell the audience who he is and how twisted he is? And I think you're working on a show about him. Is that right?
We put a show out just a little less than a year ago, a 4-part series that's on Discovery Plus, and I was one of the executive producers on it, called Unseemly: The Peter Nygaard Investigation. Peter Nygaard is a wealthy Canadian who became a near billionaire from making jeans, women's jeans, and other fashion. And along the way, he was also accused of raping hundreds of women over 50 years, up to and including drugging them, forced sex. He also had a compound in the Bahamas where it's alleged that he raped a number of underage girls in a most vicious and brutal fashion. He was so bizarre and so twisted that, as the allegations go, and we have this all in the series, he actually would impregnate girls, encourage them to have abortions so they could harvest the stem cells from the fetuses, where he was the father, and inject them into himself as this fountain of youth. And this guy is so bad that his own son turned against him and was interviewed in my program. Some of the models who worked for him and were in his orbit, he used to have these crazy parties, interviewed with us. And it finally led to his arrest and downfall. And his extradition is still pending to come to the United States and face charges that at 80 years old almost would certainly be a life sentence. But you talk about the ultimate predator. I mean, Epstein, horrible. Nygaard, arguably, if you can even say that, if it's hard for me to even say there's somebody worse than Epstein, but Nygaard, clearly a monster. And he had bought off politicians in the Bahamas. I mean, we had stories about him delivering bribe money inside a frozen fish to a politician. He had these politicians at his daughter's wedding. Just a cruel and creepy man. Sadistic.
I don't see Karm get shocked. When you said injecting stem cells, there was a look of horror on your face, Karm.
Well, I mean, it is absolutely. This is something I didn't hear. I mean, many stories I heard during the last 82 years.
He makes Weinstein look like a nice Jewish boy.
Yeah, like a choir boy,
Man, there's
we had, as part of our investigation, we actually had video. His own videographer came forward to be interviewed for the series and gave us video of him in his private plane. Nygaard, video of these quote unquote pamper parties, things that would go on in the Bahamas. We went to the Bahamas and interviewed these victims. And it was just, I'd never seen anything like it. And, the evil that one human being could put into the world. It's just shocking. Never seen anything like it.
And these are people with quote unquote everything. These are the people with the private jets, the money, and yet they're just twisted. I wonder if that lavish sort of lifestyle and the power plays into that compulsion. I think it does.
Well, I think it allows you to. It supports the habit, exactly, but it also allows people to feel that they're above the law, they're above prosecution, and for a long time, again, this is a guy who might have gotten away with it. We were banging the drum hard. The New York Times was on it. You could legitimately ask a question without the pressure that we put on this, and without some very diligent investigators who were working on a civil case between Nygaard and a billionaire hedge fund manager named Louis Bacon, who had the estate next to him in the Bahamas. Bacon gets in a beef with Nygaard, actually of Nygaard's making, about property lines and things like that. So this beachfront battle in the Bahamas between billionaires turns into the reveal of this horrific predator monster. And it was the investigators hired by Bacon and his brother to sort out the civil matter who uncovered all this criminal evidence. And that's how I got onto it. And then, the New York Times got onto it, and they published, and we put our piece together, and literally, a matter of weeks before the series went on, he was indicted in the Southern District of Manhattan on human trafficking charges, and there are other charges pending, both here and in
but
Canada.
He's still in the Bahamas.
No, he's in jail in Canada, awaiting extradition to the U.S. I don't think he's ever getting out. He's appealed and tried to get bail and bond, and it's not gonna happen.
Hey, Chris, one thing that is sticking in my mind is a comment you made earlier when you were set up to catch Rabbi K. You said he kind of lunged at you. You put yourself in harm's way a lot by doing what you were doing to expose these people. Ever a scary moment, someone brandishing a weapon, trying to attack you, anything along those lines?
We're very careful. I mean, if we have a fair amount of intel on these guys before they walk in the predator cases, and we try in all the different cases that we do to know as much as we can about the guy. And if there's any question or talk of a gun, or if we know the guy's got a concealed weapons permit, we'll let law enforcement handle that. None of this is worth anybody getting shot or killed over. It's dangerous enough just the way it is. So we take a lot of precautions. A lot goes into it.
Can I ask?
Sure, of course.
I know that when I was a
Chris,
student,
I'm trying to teach her that this is her show, so she doesn't have to ask.
I am very polite.
It's a work in progress.
I had a sign on my desk, don't talk while I'm interrupting.
Chris, by the way, in your long career and since the world has gone digital and everyone has a podcast and you're a highly sought out guest, have you ever had an 82-year-old Holocaust survivor as a host?
No, and I'm honored, by the way, to be a part of that.
I was only 5 when I was in the Holocaust.
Karm, your question, you probably forgot it.
I forgot it. You always do this to me. You are my number one enemy right now.
Did you forget it for real?
For real, because it was an excellent question.
We were talking about Peter. I was asking Chris about he put himself in harm's way, the rabbi lunged.
Oh, yeah, I knew what I wanted to ask. Thank you, Joel. Yes. I didn't even have a chance. You see, when I was a student in Geneva, Switzerland, I lived, my windows were kind of in the back on the roof of a garage, going out to the roof of a garage. And one night, somebody came, knocked on my door, one of the tenants, and they said they saw a peeping Tom looking in through my window. Unrelated to the topic, but the point is, the police in Geneva, Switzerland assured me that they are harmless people, that they will not use violence, they will not try to break in, that they just like to expose themselves. I was overjoyed. That was the whole story, you know. But I don't know if these predators, if they have like a profile like that. And I don't even know if it's true about people who expose themselves.
I'd question it. It seems to me, and based upon what, people in this world, in the investigative world have said to me, is that oftentimes these guys start as peeping Toms and then exposing themselves, and they graduate into sexual assault and more aggressive crimes. And we've seen cases, and when we were doing the series for Investigation Discovery, Killer Instinct, we had cases where these guys started this way and evolved into rapists and killers. So I don't know that. I'm glad that was the case back then, but I don't know that's always the case now.
Well, Chris, you have done yeoman's work. The good news for you is that there are guys like Josh Duggar, if I'm saying it right. You've got R. Kelly. The list goes on. You have, for as long as you live, you will have these sick people out there that you can do stories on. Because it would
appear so, Joel, and I don't know whether that's, I guess it's job security, but I thought, I thought on the Predator series we do it once or twice and nobody would show up. They'd be afraid. And to this day, I mean, 2 nights ago in the chat that we had with one of the potential predators, the question came up: is this Chris Hansen? Is Chris Hansen and his crew there? These guys get arrested by the FBI when I'm not even there, and they're facing serious time for what they did. But their next question is Chris Hansen there? Is this going to be on TV? I mean, I hope it's a deterrent, but I really thought after 2 or 3 investigations, these guys just wouldn't show up. Mm-hmm. But here we are,
they would
17 years later.
Each other.
Yeah.
And you are certainly extremely well known, because everybody I mentioned that we are interviewing you, they say, oh, that's the guy. And they all know what you were doing. And so, you were like at the golden age of television, so the public knew it. So these people knew it. They must have been aware that there is that danger of
well, I think, and now, because, the originals and the new ones all are, on the internet and digitally available. I mean, we're literally into the 3rd generation of followers on this. I always tell the story when my 2 oldest were in high school, having a dad on television wasn't a big deal. They went to high school with, kids whose dads were captains of industry and wealthy investors and, athletes. But when South Park did a Chris Hansen, Predator parody episode, suddenly I was the coolest dad in the whole bunch. So
Karm, you ever hear of South Park?
Yes, I heard it's an animated thing.
It's a naughty cartoon. It's a naughty cartoon.
Well, Chris, listen,
it's iconic.
You have done yeoman's work. It's incredible.
Well, I appreciate it, Joel.
What you have done. Keep up the good fight, as they say. I will shamelessly ask. I am not in our business. We meet a lot of famous people. I'm not a guy that gets starstruck, but if you can subtly get me Keith Morrison as a guest, I will.
Oh yeah.
I will do whatever you need me to do.
Well,
Steve
also 1 minute before you go, you have your podcast now, right?
I have the podcast, Predators I've Caught, with Chris Hansen. We just broke 1 million downloads this past week, which I'm very excited about. Thank you. And we've got the YouTube channel, Have a Seat with Chris Hansen. We do crime content there. We've got a couple of new television projects in the works. We've got
you have Discovery Plus, right?
Discovery Plus, which is where the Peter Nygaard series is, and Onision in Real Life, which is a very creepy, revealing story about a internet personality who was preying upon young women, and 5 or 6 other things in the works. So it's a very exciting time. It's a good time.
And all the best and good luck and good health.
Well, God bless you, my dear. It was great to be here. Thank you.
Everything good.